Peace talks are underway in Moscow between senior Afghan officials and Taliban chiefs. Even former President Hamid Karzai is taking part. Oddly missing from these summits, the official Afghan government, who many claim are weakening as the Taliban regains influence across the country. Joining us now to discuss, former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. All right, Mike, lots to talk about. Let's hop to it. Ashraf Ghani, the sitting president of Afghanistan, is criticizing these talks as undermining the fragile state of his government. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's very fragile. And if the U.S. were to leave tomorrow, it would collapse. And
the whole government, the whole thing?
Yeah, it would go away. It would go away. And you'd have turmoil and civil war, the usual. Pretty much what happened after Russians pulled out in the early 80s. So, excuse me. But the problem with the U.S. and negotiations with the Taliban is that they're not negotiating yet. They're talking on what terms will be subject to negotiation.
Or what they're open to talking about.
Yeah, what they're going to talk about. They're not at the position of negotiating yet. They're talking about what will be the terms for negotiation, and that's hitting major stumbling blocks. For example, Taliban talking to the Kabul government. It's a no-no for them. And all they want are U.S. troops out. What they are beginning to discuss will be what the U.S. On the U.S. pullout.
Yeah.
But U.S. Khalilzad, the U.S. negotiator there, is Ambassador Khalilzad, is basically saying, well, ultimately, we want you to agree to the term of talking to the government. And let me get back to you on that, is what they're saying.
So it's a non-starter on that subject?
Well, not necessarily. It depends. There are some elements outside, and we're seeing this reflected now in the meeting that's going to be taking place in Moscow with intra-Afghan discussions, where some elements are saying, you know, maybe it's not a bad idea to be talking to the government. Some members of parliament, for example, in Kabul are suggesting that, but they're not pushing it. It really depends upon what Taliban decides to do, and they haven't decided yet.
But now Ashraf Ghani is also at odds with Americans. He views the American negotiators as kind of rushing in to take any deal just to end the 17-year war. Do you agree with that? Yeah,
I think there's a rush to exit, and the U.S. is trying to buy the best terms. And the primacy, as far as Khalilzad is concerned, is how can the U.S. withdraw without getting shot at, and it secondarily will be the preservation of the Kabul government, if at all. But we're not even there yet,
right.
And because you have all these other elements like tribal chiefs, what's their impression? What rights of women? None of this is on the table yet.
Now, Ghani's obviously, I mean, he seems upset at the potential American withdrawal. He's comparing it, like you said, to the 80s when the Soviet Union left, the Afghan army basically just collapsed flat. Why does it seem like the Afghani military just can't seem to stand on their own?
Well, because of mixed loyalties, it's not their bag to be military. They're good guerrilla fighters, but they're not military types. And because of the waning interest and support for the government, I mean, we've seen this reflected in the green on blue attacks, even on U.S. forces there. So. Corruption is embedded in the soul of the Afghan authorities. I mean, and corruption seems to be one of the major problems that existing government has in even existing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would argue that exists anyway because of economic disparities there.
Oh, sure.
And most people are, you know.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of taking off of the top. You're skimming off of the top. By government officials. I mean, they're in there for their own self-preservation, and then they send the money overseas, and then they exit.
They exit their role.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now the women, there are several women who are taking part in this meeting. Three to four of them, I'm hearing.
Well, the one in Moscow.
In Moscow. They are members of Afghan parliament.
Right.
The women wanted assurances that the Taliban would respect women's rights if there were to be a power-sharing agreement. Could this actually happen?
Well, that's a good question, simply because in the past, Taliban, when they had full control, were very dogmatic, very ruthless on women. They basically subjugated them to the home and no education, and in fact would execute them, but they would read and all this. It was very It was really awful. And there's a sense that there's a moderating influence on the one hand with the Taliban coming in.
I mean, are they modernizing? Is that the sense I'm getting?
Moderating maybe that harshness of their more extreme interpretation of Islam. And also, you're talking about younger people who comprise maybe a majority of the country today that have lived since 9/11 under this current government, and they're expecting to be able to have more rights and what have you. I think it's a question, there's a balance in their minds. Do we want more rights or do we want peace?
Wow.
It's come down to that.
Both.
You may not be able to get both.
At least not yet.
Not yet. But maybe there might be some moderating aspects. And it's not going to be discussed with Khalilzad in a matter of a few weeks, a few months. These kinds of negotiations, discussions could last years. And there's even talk by seasoned U.S. diplomats who have had experience in Afghanistan for years that the United States should remain there because to ensure that these kinds of rights are allowed, and also that it's not used as an opportunity for Taliban to just take over the entire country and sweep away whatever reforms they were hoping for. And that may not happen.
Mike, certainly interesting turn of events happening in Moscow this week. So
very fluid.
I think we will see a lot more women speaking up in Afghanistan and taking part in the years to come. So we will be talking about that. Thank you, as always, for sharing your expertise with us. Michael Maloof.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.